Hello, everyone. This is the Bearded Music Teacher Podcast, and I am Mr. E. And today is episode 18, where we talk about Peter, Paul, and Mary. But first, you can find me on Twitter at Mr. underscore E underscore music FCS. Again, that's MR underscore E underscore music FCS. All video or audio reproductions of this podcast is strictly prohibited without the written consent of myself, yours truly, Mr. E. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this content. For the video people, you see on the slide deck Peter, Paul, and Mary. That is the discussion for today. And just to give you a little bit of idea on where we're at, if you're a new listener, this is an educational podcast where I use this for my students, where they can check out if I'm covering this topic in class, I can shoot them an email, say, hey, we covered Peter, Paul, and Mary today. Or if they are wanting to review, let's say we have a test coming up, they can review these podcasts and they can get everything that they need to without the listening. Again, we don't do any listening activities on this podcast. We don't listen to the music on this podcast. I encourage my students and listeners to go out and find these tunes because I don't want to violate any copyright issues. I respect the artist as an artist myself, and so I want to make sure that everything is above board, shall we say. All right, so Peter, Paul, and Mary. They were formed in New York's Greenwich Village scene in 61. The group known as Peter, Paul, and Mary eventually eclipsed the Kingston Trio as the most successful folk pop group of the 60s. They were three individuals, Peter, Paul, and Mary. They did such things later on as I Know an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Fly. They did the song for that. It was I believe it was just a regular folk song, but I showed my kids this as a way of breaking from the rock history thing, and we talk about performances, and I told them I know this song, and I'll sing it to them, and I go, I know an old lady who swallowed a cat. Imagine that she swallowed the cat. And I go through and I do very, very serious. Very, very serious, no expression, done. And they go, okay, yeah, so what? But then when I play them the Peter, Paul, and Mary version of it, and they love it. They love watching that. They go, oh, okay, that's actually really quite fun to watch. And so we talk about the idea of performance as an aspect, but then we get back to the seriousness of the conversations and of this particular genre. And so I said, well, you probably have heard some of these songs. And I say Lemon Tree, and I tell them that it was in the pop charts at 35 and it was in 1962. And they're like, okay, no. And I go, If I Had a Hammer. And they go, no. I play for them the track by them. Now, there's many different versions of If I Had a Hammer. It was done by many, many people. There's actually a British group that did it during the British invasion. I can't remember exactly who it is, but they did a version of it. But that was their Peter, Paul, and Mary's version hit number 10 in 1962. And I say, okay, well, Puff the Magic Dragon. And they go, I don't know what that is. Whatever. And that was probably the better charting of them, which is pop charts number 2, R&B charts number 10. And that was in 1962, I want to say. And so I go over that with them. I sing them the song, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's the thing." Puff the Magic Dragon lived by the sea, and they're like, "Oh yeah, cool." And then they go, "Doesn't it have drug references?" I go, "Well, yes. There people have." And we look at the different meanings of it, and we say, yes, there could be specific references to it, but it was really a story of a child losing his innocence, growing up to be a kid with imagination that imagines a dragon taking him all over, to then growing up very seriously. The dragon still is there, but then they realize that the boy doesn't want to do that. And this is something that reflects in everyone's life. I have a son, and I've taught little kids where even little guys, pre-K, all right, in the U.S. system, pre-K, you look at kids that are 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, and even in kindergarten, fifth, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, going all the way up to early elementary, there's an imagination there. When I would teach kids that were pre-K, they would pretend to play as certain superheroes, as a mom and dad in a family. They would go after bad guys that they look and they go, look, it's a bad guy, and there was clearly nothing there, but it was their imagination. And that's what Puff the Magic Dragon, if you talk to the artist, if you see interviews with the artist, it was a rite of passage, so to speak. It was the development of the human being, going from very wondrous to the harsh reality of the world, which is very typical message of the time. It was a very, hey, look, this is the reality of things. But besides Puff the Magic Dragon, they also covered a folk hero, Bob Dylan, with Blowin' in the Wind. And their first album, Peter, Paul, and Mary's, that is, in 1962, stayed on the charts for 195 weeks. So just under the 195 total from the Kingston Trio. So Peter Yarrow had been a folk singer as a solo artist. Paul Stokke had been in a rock and roll band, and Mary Trower has sung in a chorus of a lot of unsuccessful Broadway musicals, and they came to know each other through that Greenwich Village scene, which was known to be the start of the career of Bob Dylan as well. And it's very worthy to note that those two really fed off each other with Blowin' in the Wind. We look at the original version by Bob Dylan, which was written by Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan would frequently write songs. He was a good singer songwriter. He would go and do those. And he would write these songs and he would give them to the artists to do. So he was like the big shift back to the singer songwriter, and we'll talk about that in the next podcast about Bob Dylan. But I in the classroom will take a look at Bob Dylan's song of "Blowin' in the Wind," where he plays the guitar and the harmonica, and that's just Bob Dylan right there. And then I play immediately after that, "Blowin' in the Wind," the exact same song by Peter, Paul, and Mary. And there's a difference in the way they approach it. It's the same tune, it's the same chords. If I remember, it's the same key. But the way they do it, the way they perform it is different. And it takes on a different mentality. To me, it takes on, because of the way they sing it and how they sing it, a more um, darker tone to it. While Bob Dylan's is more like a, hey, we're just going down the road. We're just going down. And that's it. With Peter, Paul, and Mary, it's a little darker to me. So I would encourage you to go check them out. Again, this is Peter, Paul, and Mary that I'm referring to. And the ones that I would say, the top three that I would say, hey, look, you got to go look at and really see if you can find other versions of, is If I Had a Hammer, and that was done in 1962. Puff the Magic Dragon, again, in 62. Blowin' in the Wind in 63. And then compare that Blowin' in the Wind with Dylan's version. So really, I would tell my students, if we didn't get to it in class, I'd say, okay, these are the four that you got to listen to and do something with. If I Had a Hammer, Puff the Magic Dragon, Blowin' in the Wind, both versions. And make sure you check out other ones. Their catalog goes through not just the 60s, but through later on in their lives. And so I would highly recommend that you check out their stuff. They have a lot of great kids songs, kid friendly songs, and that would be something that you would also like to check out in the way that they do their harmonizations. They're harmonizing, they're singing with each other, and the way they deliver the songs in general. But that wraps it up for this episode on Peter, Paul, and Mary. Please make sure you check out the other podcast episodes, both video and audio. They're the same thing as what you have here. Spread the word about this. Spread the word about the podcasts. And again, this is for educational purposes, and all reproductions of this podcast are strictly prohibited without the express written consent of the author, Mr. E. You can find Mr. E on Twitter at MR_E_music FCS. Thank you for rocking and rolling with me through rock history.